They did that to harp on the possibility there might be a handful, maybe a couple hundred, of combatants under the age of 15. And in using the age of 18, they added another 1,000 to 1,500 possible child soldiers when those other ones were in fact not. So they ignored the plight of 250 to 500,000 Tamil children on the island of Ceylon for the political effect of dwelling on a potential 1,500 to 2,000 child soldiers with no evidence whatsoever that any one of those possible child soldiers was engaged in armed conflict at all. A lot of the demonizing was going on during the ceasefire. Very, very few Tamils who looked to be combatants under the age of even 18 were found on the battlefields. Possibly toward the end, when citizens themselves were rising up in what's called a levée en masse on the approach of the enemy, many Tamils in the LTTE-controlled area, in the end, actually became kind of like militia. Some of those may have been underage children, but we're talking about a few days and a disastrous, catastrophic situation. Canadian Alan Rock went to Sri Lanka at the behest of the United Nations official because she is a Sri Lankan Tamil, although she has been shrilly against a lot of the aims of the Sri Lankan Tamils herself, unfortunately. Alan Rock came back, reported to the United Nations, and in a, I forget how many pages, maybe a 68-page report, he talked about child soldiers until page 63. Gave lip service to two other of the issues of children in armed conflict, didn't discuss three at all. One wonders what the real aim was of that kind of agenda when the mandate has 6 items to cover, including, of course, the provision of food and medicine to civilians, the failure of which is a war crime under international law and an element of the crime of extermination under the International Criminal Court statute and elements. The government of Canada also hosted a parade of high Sri Lankan officials who had come to Canada saying such things as undermining the Tamil, trying to get the Canadian government to arrest the Tamils. The Canadian government has arrested Tamils for collecting aid for victims of armed conflict, which itself is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. So it's with a great deal of chagrin that I have to look at the role. You've allowed a genocide. You spoke up too little, too late, and very weakly. And in fact, when you listen to the Canadian statements in the United Nations, you have to struggle to find the word Tamil. They don't say Tamils. They say affected people or civilians. The only time they say the word Tamil is when they're saying Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, end of the Tamils. And in the recent 11th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council that just took place earlier this month, under the agenda item for concern over country situations, Canada didn't even mention Sri Lanka at all. This was after the catastrophe. It was also after the special session, but that was no excuse given the size of the Tamil population in Canada, and if I must say, the heavy load on the shoulders of the government of Canada. To Canada's favor, I think the government of Canada was seriously shocked by the outcome of the special session on Sri Lanka, which was held in late May. If the government of Canada wasn't shocked, then the government of Canada should have been shocked. It was one of the most disastrous sessions of the Human Rights Council or a special session I have ever seen in my 27 years at the United Nations. We will talk about it a little bit more today, But I do think it is very important that Canadian Tamils, Canadian non-Tamils, people around the world, regarding all the countries that played the little terrorist game to the detriment of the armed conflict, humanitarian law, etc., are held accountable. Now, because of the commitment of so many war crimes, the government of Canada is also liable under the Geneva Conventions to seek out and find those that violated, and if possible, try them in their own courts or any other court. Obviously, there will be no war crimes tribunals in Sri Lanka. So under international law, we have to find other tribunals. My hope is that Canada will be one of those. My hope is that the Canadian government will act on its obligations under the Geneva Conventions, under the law of genocide, and other binding international laws that hold the world together to the degree we even have a world to hold together. Without humanitarian law properly applied, we are all lost. To might makes right. We're back even before the UN Charter. So I encourage Tamil Canadians, non-Tamil Canadians to work with the government to get the government into a much better forward position. Later in the day, we will talk, as I explained earlier, I will present much more detail of some of the international law concepts so you have much more meat on the bones when you're discussing self-determination with your MPs and the government. We will also talk about some other possible forward agendas, including further actions at the United Nations and things that the Government of Canada and you all can do affirmatively, because ultimately the Tamil people must have their full rights, not a bargained lesser status. Thank you very much.